Have you ever been judged by your cover? Told you don't belong somewhere you've more than earned the right to be? This is the story of Aria Carrington, a titan of industry, a black CEO who, after a grueling week, just wanted a moment of peace. But in the hushed, exclusive world of a first-class airport lounge, she was met not with service, but with suspicion. They tried to eject her, to humiliate her in front of strangers. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Stay tuned to witness the moment their world came crashing down, and how a single metallic card unleashed a tidal wave of karma that would redefine justice. The scent of recycled air and frantic energy that defined John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 7 was a familiar assault on the senses. For Aria Carrington, CEO of the multi-billion-dollar tech firm Zenith Dynamics, it was the final hurdle in a marathon week. She had just closed a nine-figure acquisition in Tokyo, navigated a brutal series of board meetings in New York, and now all that stood between her and a well-deserved respite at her London home was a 7-hour flight. Aria was the embodiment of quiet power. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal gray suit, the lines were clean, severe, and impeccably tailored. There was no flashy jewelry, only the subtle glint of a Patek Philippe Calatrava on her wrist, a gift to herself after Zenith's IPO. Her natural hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. At 38, she possessed a composure that could quell boardroom rebellions and charm hostile negotiators. A calm forged in the fires of 1,000 microaggressions and 100 battles against assumptions. She looked less like a person who traveled and more like a person the world rearranged itself around. Her briefcase, a vintage Hermes sac à dépêche, held not just her laptop but the weight of her company, the livelihoods of her 10,000 employees, and the proof of her grueling ascent. All she wanted was the sanctuary of the Sterling Club, British Airways' flagship VIP lounge. She craved the muted lighting, the scent of polished mahogany and fresh espresso, the blissful anonymity of sinking into a plush leather armchair and simply breathing. She approached the polished podium at the lounge entrance. Behind it stood a young woman, her name tag reading Bethany Rose. Bethany Rose had meticulously styled blonde hair, a crisp uniform, and an air of someone who wielded her minor authority like a royal scepter. Her smile was plastered on, bright and unyielding, but it didn't quite reach her eyes as she looked at Aria. "Good evening," Aria said, her voice a low, melodious hum, betraying none of her exhaustion. She presented her boarding pass for flight BA246, clearly marked Club World, British Airways business class. Bethany Rose took the pass, her manicured fingers tapping it against the counter. Her eyes did a swift, dismissive scan of Aria, from her braids down to her simple, elegant loafers. It was a look Aria knew well. It was the, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" look. "Just one moment," Bethany Rose said, her tone syrupy sweet but laced with something sharp. She tapped at her computer, her brow furrowing in theatrical concentration. The system is being a bit sluggish today." Aria waited patiently. She had learned long ago that patience was a weapon. Reacting to the slight would only validate the aggressor's prejudice. She let the silence hang, a quiet challenge to the attendant's charade. Another minute passed. Bethany Rose let out a small, frustrated sigh. "I'm so sorry," she said, the apology sounding more like an accusation. "It seems we are at absolute capacity for Club World passengers at the moment. Fire regulations, you understand. We have to be so careful." Aria's gaze remained steady. She could see past Bethany Rose into the lounge. It was busy, but far from full. There were several empty armchairs visible from where she stood. "At capacity? That seems unusual for a Tuesday evening." "We've had a slew of delays," Bethany Rose chirped, her explanation too quick, too rehearsed. "It's created a bit of a bottleneck. You're welcome to try again in about an hour. Or there are some lovely coffee shops downstairs." The dismissal was as clear as it was insulting. Go downstairs where you belong. Aria felt the familiar spark of anger, a hot needle in her chest, but she immediately encased it in ice. Showing emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. It would be twisted into the stereotype of the angry black woman, justifying their behavior. I've had a rather long day, Arya said, her voice still impossibly calm. I'm quite sure if you check again, you'll find a spot. It was then that a man behind her, in the queue, a portly figure in a rumpled suit reeking of cheap cologne and entitlement, decided to insert himself. For God's sake, he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the marble-floored hall. Some people just can't take a hint. If the lounge is full, it's full. Stop holding up the line for those of us who actually belong here. Bethany Rose shot the man a grateful, conspiratorial smile. He had said the quiet part out loud. Belong here. The two words hung in the air, a toxic vapor. The casual racism, so effortlessly deployed, was the true gatekeeper. Arya slowly turned her head to look at the man. She didn't speak. She just held his gaze. Her stare was not angry or threatening. It was analytical, like a scientist observing a particularly uninteresting specimen under a microscope. The man who moments before had been puffing his chest out seemed to deflate slightly under the weight of that silent, dissecting gaze. But the damage was done. The situation had escalated. Bethany Rose, emboldened by her new ally, crossed her arms. "Ma'am, as I said, we are full," she repeated, her voice now firm, shedding the pretense of politeness. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The stage was set. The audience, a handful of other travelers, were watching. The injustice was palpable, a bitter taste in the air. Arya knew this was no longer about a seat in a lounge. It was about standing her ground, not just for herself, but for every person of color who had ever been made to feel like an imposter in a space they had earned. She took a slow, deliberate breath. They had no idea the storm they were about to unleash. Part 2, The Manager's Gambit. The tension at the entrance to the Sterling Club had solidified into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Arya remained motionless, a statue of serene defiance, while Bethany Rose's expression hardened from feigned sympathy into outright hostility. The boorish businessman, Gregory Thompson, shifted his weight, a smug smirk playing on his lips, clearly relishing the drama he had helped ignite. "Is there a problem here?" Arya asked, her voice dangerously soft. It wasn't a question of inquiry, it was a demand for justification. Bethany Rose's confidence wavered for a split second before she doubled down. "The problem, ma'am, is that the lounge is full for your ticket class, and you are refusing to accept that. You are causing a disturbance." "The only disturbance," Arya countered, her eyes flicking momentarily to Gregory Thompson, "was the unsolicited commentary from behind me. I am simply questioning a policy that appears selectively enforced." Her gaze swept over the half-empty lounge visible over Bethany Rose's shoulder. This was too much for the young attendant. Her authority, fragile as it was, had been directly challenged. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "I don't have to explain our policies to you. If you refuse to move, I'll have to call my manager." "Please do," Arya replied, the two words landing like stones in a still pond. Bethany Rose, flustered but trying to maintain an air of control, picked up the phone behind her counter. "Robert, I have a situation at the front desk. A passenger is refusing to cooperate." She infused the word cooperate with a world of meaning, painting Arya as belligerent and unreasonable. A few minutes later, Robert Miller appeared. He was a man in his late 40s, with a receding hairline he tried to hide with careful combing, and a suit that was just a little too tight at the waist. He carried himself with the weary posture of a mid-level manager who had seen it all and was tired of most of it. His default setting was de-escalation, which in his playbook usually meant placating the loudest person and removing the perceived source of the friction. "Good evening," he said, his eyes darting between Arya, Bethany Rose, and Gregory Thompson, trying to read the battlefield. "What seems to be the trouble?" Bethany Rose launched into her version of events. "I've explained to this lady," she said, stumbling over the word as if it didn't fit, "that we are at capacity for Club World passengers. I've politely asked her to wait or come back later, but she refuses to listen and is holding up the entire queue." Gregory Thompson immediately chimed in, eager to play the role of star witness. "That's right, I saw the whole thing. The girl was perfectly polite. This one here just wouldn't take no for an answer. Thinks the rules don't apply to her, I suppose." He winked at Robert. a clear signal of male camaraderie against a difficult woman. Robert Miller's eyes settled on Arya. He saw a black woman in a power suit standing alone, and his mind, conditioned by years of societal biases and corporate training that prioritized expediency over justice, made a swift calculation. She was the nail that was sticking up. She was the one to be hammered down. "Ma'am," he began, adopting a tone of condescending paternalism, "I understand your frustration. Travel can be stressful. However, my staff are just doing their job. Our capacity limits are strict. I'm sure you can understand." "Mr. Miller, is it?" Arya asked, reading his name tag. Her voice was like ice. "I understand policies. I also understand what I can see with my own eyes. Your lounge is not full. What I fail to understand is why your staff would lie about it." Robert's professional smile tightened. This was not going the way he'd planned. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't backing down. "Now let's not use inflammatory language like lie," he chided gently. "There may have been a misunderstanding. Perhaps the system hasn't updated with the latest departures. The point is, for the comfort and safety of all our guests, I have to trust my team's assessment. And the assessment of this gentleman?" Arya gestured with a slight nod towards Thompson. "Is he part of your team as well?" Thompson puffed up again. "I'm a frequent flyer, a gold card holder. I know how these things work. I know the sort of people who belong in here." The implication was disgusting and undeniable. Robert Miller chose to ignore it completely. He saw the path of least resistance, and it was a path that led directly away from confronting a wealthy-looking white male passenger. "Sir, thank you for your input, but I can handle this," Robert said to Thompson, before turning his full attention back to Arya. His expression had lost all pretense of helpfulness. It was now one of finality. "Ma'am, I have now personally reviewed the situation. The decision stands. The lounge is not available to you at this time. I am now asking you, as the manager of this facility, to please step away from the desk and allow us to serve our other guests." It was a public dismissal. He had sided with his prejudiced staff and a bigoted customer. He had looked at Arya Carrington, a woman who could buy and sell his entire life's earnings before breakfast, and judged her unworthy. The humiliation was meant to be the final blow, the thing that would finally make her retreat in shame. Other travelers were now openly staring, some with sympathy, others with cold indifference. The air crackled. Bethany Rose stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk now fully formed. Gregory Thompson looked on, vindicated. "So, to be clear," Arya said, her voice dropping to an almost inaudible, chillingly precise level, "you are officially refusing me entry and telling me to leave?" "Those are the options, yes," Robert confirmed, his patience worn thin. "Please, don't make this any more difficult than it needs to be." Arya held his gaze for a long moment. He thought he had won. He thought the unpleasantness was over. He was about to learn that it had only just begun. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," she said softly. "You've made your position clear." Then with a slow, deliberate movement that drew every eye in the vicinity, she reached into the inner pocket of her suit jacket. It wasn't her wallet she pulled out. It was a single slim card holder. The air in front of the Sterling Club podium was thick with smug victory. Robert Miller felt a wave of relief. The difficult woman had finally conceded. Bethany Rose was already turning her attention to the next passenger, a dismissive flick of her wrist signaling that Arya's moment was over. Gregory Thompson let out a satisfied huff, adjusting his tie as if he'd just won a difficult negotiation. And then came the sound, a soft click as Arya opened the slim, leather card holder, followed by a faint schlick as she slid a card from its sleeve. Every head turned. The motion was so deliberate, so theatrical in its understatement, that it commanded attention. She wasn't reaching for a credit card to bribe them, nor an ID to argue her case. What she held between her thumb and forefinger was something else entirely. It wasn't the familiar blue and gold of a standard, frequent flyer card. This card was a heavy, matte black, forged from what looked like solid metal. It was minimalist, almost severe. In the center, the British Airways speed mark was etched not in ink, but in gleaming, polished platinum. Below it, in small, elegant letters, were 3 words: Sterling Platinum Access. Arya didn't say a word. She simply placed the card on the marble countertop. It landed with a quiet, definitive thud. The sound was nothing, a tiny noise in the grand scheme of the airport's cacophony, but in that small, charged space, it echoed like a gavel strike. Bethany Rose glanced down at it, her brain taking a moment to process what she was seeing. Her eyes widened slightly. She had seen pictures of this card during her training, in a section titled Ultra Elite Tiers, Handle with Extreme Deference. She had dismissed it as something she would likely never encounter, a mythical artifact reserved for royalty, heads of state, and the billionaire owners of global corporations. Robert Miller leaned forward, his professional smile faltering, then completely dissolving. He squinted at the card. The platinum speed mark seemed to catch the light and throw it back at him, a miniature star of pure, blinding value. His blood ran cold. Gregory Thompson, craning his neck to see what the holdup was, caught a glimpse of the black card. Even from a distance, it was clearly not a standard gold card like the one in his own wallet. It radiated an aura of exclusivity that made his own status feel like a cheap trinket. "What? What is that?" Bethany Rose stammered. The smirk wiped clean from her face, replaced by a pale mask of confusion. Arya finally broke her silence. Her voice was devoid of triumph, holding only a chilling calm. "It's my access pass." Robert reached out a trembling hand, hesitated, then picked up the card. The weight of it surprised him. It was cold and heavy, substantial. This wasn't plastic. This was power, solidified. He turned it over. On the back was Arya's name, Arya E. Carrington, and below it, not a membership number, but a simple, stark designation, Chairman's Invitation, Zenith Dynamics Global Partner. The words hit him like a physical blow. Zenith Dynamics. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. They were one of the largest enterprise software partners for the entire airline conglomerate, IAG. Their technology ran half the back-end systems of the airline he worked for. The multi-year, multi-hundred-million-dollar contract with Zenith Dynamics was legendary in the company's upper echelons. And the name, Carrington. It clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. He'd seen it in the Financial Times and Forbes. The brilliant visionary CEO who had taken Zenith Dynamics from a promising startup to a global behemoth. The face in the articles was always poised, powerful. It was the face of the woman standing right in front of him. He looked from the name on the card to Arya's calm, impassive face. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. He hadn't just insulted a passenger. He had publicly humiliated a key strategic partner of his own company. He hadn't just tried to eject a customer. He had tried to kick out the queen from her own castle. The Sterling Platinum Access Pass was not something you earned with miles. It was granted by the airline's CEO and board to a handful of individuals on the planet whose business and influence were considered existentially important. It granted unlimited, unfettered access to any lounge, any flight, any time, no questions asked. A platinum holder wasn't a guest. They were effectively a host. The staff were there to serve them. The rules Bethany Rose had quoted so smugly, capacity, ticket class, regulations, were flimsy spiderwebs in the face of this solid block of platinum. They simply did not apply. "Ms. Carrington," Robert stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. I apologize. There has been a terrible mistake." Bethany Rose looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her entire body was trembling. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her. The casual racism, the smug dismissal, it had all been directed at one of the most powerful people to ever walk into this terminal. Gregory Thompson, realizing he had loudly proclaimed that one of the airline's most important partners didn't belong, began to sweat profusely. He tried to shrink, to melt into the background, but Arya's gaze, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, found him and held him fast. "A mistake," Arya repeated softly, picking up her card from the counter and sliding it back into its holder. "No, Mr. Miller, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You made a choice. Your staff made a choice. This gentleman," she nodded at Thompson, who flinched, "made a choice. You chose to see what you wanted to see. Not what was there. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the now deathly quiet hall. And now, she continued, her voice still low but resonating with absolute authority, I'm going to make a choice. She reached into her Hermes briefcase, but this time, she pulled out her phone. Her thumb moved deftly across the screen, finding a name in her contacts. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quietest words from the powerful carry farther than the loudest shouts from the weak. She put the phone to her ear. Robert and Bethany Rose watched, frozen in a state of pure, unadulterated terror. They knew with a certainty that chilled them to the bone that they weren't just about to lose their jobs. They were about to become a cautionary tale. The click of Arya's phone connecting was the only sound in the vacuum of dread that had enveloped the lounge entrance. Robert Miller's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of impending doom. Bethany Rose stood paralyzed, her face a canvas of dawning horror. She could feel her future, a bright and upwardly mobile career path she had so carefully planned, cracking and crumbling into dust. "David, it's Arya," she said into the phone, her tone as conversational as if she were ordering tea. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." Robert's mind reeled. David. There was only one David in the upper echelons of the airline, who a person like Arya Carrington would call by his first name, Sir David Harrison, the Chief Commercial Officer for International Airlines Group, British Airways parent company. He was a legend, a ruthless operator who sat on the board and whose displeasure could end careers across continents with a single email. "I'm fine, thank you," Arya continued, a slight mirthless smile touching her lips. "Well, mostly. I'm actually at your JFK Sterling Club right now. Or more accurately, I'm standing outside of it." She paused, listening. Robert could almost hear the confused questions from the other end of the line. No, my pass is fine," Arya said, her eyes locking onto Robert Miller's. "The issue seems to be more philosophical. Your lounge manager here, a Mr. Robert Miller, has just informed me that I'm not welcome. He has, in fact, instructed me to leave the premises." She held the phone slightly away from her ear. Even from a few feet away, the faint, tinny sound of a raised, furious voice could be heard erupting from the receiver. It was a squall of outrage, a torrent of panicked, high-level corporate fury being unleashed across the Atlantic. Robert Miller began to sweat through his suit jacket. His starched collar felt like a garrote, tightening around his neck. He wanted to speak, to plead, to explain, but his tongue was a leaden weight in his mouth. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry, Sir David. I judged her by the color of her skin and assumed she was a nuisance," Arya continued, her voice a calm narrative in the face of the hurricane on the other end. His front desk attendant, Bethany Rose, was quite creative. She insisted the lounge was at capacity, despite visual evidence to the contrary. And there was another passenger, a Mr. She paused, her gaze sliding over to Gregory Thompson, who was now desperately trying to wheel his carry-on away and disappear into the crowd. "Ah, he seems to be in a hurry. A gold card holder who was very vocal about who does and does not belong here." Her message was clear. She wasn't just reporting bad service. She was methodically dismantling them, piece by piece, with cold, irrefutable facts, to one of the most powerful men in their industry. "Yes, David, I agree. It is disappointing," she said. "It speaks to a systemic training failure. A cultural issue, really." She used the language of corporate oversight, words that every executive dreads hearing, as they imply a deep-rooted rot that goes far beyond a single employee's mistake. "I'm sure you'll handle it." Another pause. "Yes, that would be appropriate. Put him on." Arya held the phone out to Robert Miller. It was not an offer, it was a command. Her face was unreadable, a mask of placid control. To the terrified manager, the sleek black smartphone looked like an executioner's warrant. His hand trembled so violently he could barely take it. "Hello?" Robert croaked, his voice cracking. He was met with a volley of words so sharp, so venomous, it made him physically recoil. The voice on the other end didn't yell. It seethed. It was the sound of millions of dollars in partnership goodwill being vaporized in real time, and Robert Miller was ground zero. He stood there, nodding mutely, his face ashen, whispering, "Yes, Sir David," And I understand, Sir David, and no, Sir David, no excuses. While Robert was being verbally flayed, Arya turned her attention to the now sobbing Bethany Rose. Tears won't help you, Arya said, not unkindly, but with the firm finality of a judge delivering a sentence. You made a judgment today based on prejudice. You draped it in corporate policy, but we both know what it was. Let this be a lesson. Your ambition is useless if it's not guided by integrity. Bethany Rose could only choke out a muffled, "I'm so sorry," a pathetic sound in the cavernous terminal. Finally, Robert lowered the phone, his arm falling to his side as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out shell of the man who had been so confident just 10 minutes earlier. "Ms. Carrington," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "please, the entire lounge is yours. Anything you want. A private room, champagne, anything." Arya looked past him, into the opulent space she had been denied. The soft lighting and plush chairs now seemed tainted. The peace she had sought there was shattered. "No, thank you, Robert," she said, reclaiming her phone. "I don't think I'd be very comfortable in your lounge tonight, or ever again." She turned to leave, her point devastatingly made. But just as she took a step, a new voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, Ms. Carrington?" It was a harried-looking airport official in a senior uniform, flanked by two more airline representatives in sharp suits. They had clearly sprinted from some other part of the terminal, their faces flushed and beaded with sweat. The senior official was speaking into his radio. "Yes, I have visual. The platinum holder is here. Stand by." The cavalry had arrived, not for Robert and Bethany Rose, but for Arya. The corporate machine, jolted into panic by Sir David's call, was now scrambling to perform damage control on an epic scale. The senior official approached Arya, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of profound deference. "Ms. Carrington, on behalf of the entire airport authority and British Airways, please accept our deepest, most sincere apologies for this unacceptable incident. We have the Windsor suite ready for you. It's our private, by-invitation-only suite, completely isolated. Your own staff, private chef, direct boarding access. Please allow us to escort you." Arya looked at the frantic officials, then back at the ruins of Robert and Bethany Rose's careers. This was more than she had asked for, a frantic overcorrection, but rejecting it would only prolong the scene. She gave a single, crisp nod. "Thank you. That would be acceptable." As the officials formed a protective circle around her and began to guide her away, she glanced back one last time. Robert Miller was slumped against the podium. Bethany Rose was being quietly led away by another staff member, her face buried in her hands. The Sterling Club, once a symbol of prestige, now looked like the scene of a catastrophe. The karma had been swift, brutal, and absolute. But Arya knew this was only the beginning. The fallout was just starting to rain down. The Windsor suite was an oasis of impossible tranquility hidden within the chaos of JFK. It was a world away from the public-facing luxury of the Sterling Club. Here there were no other passengers. The suite was a series of elegantly appointed rooms, a library, a dining room, a media lounge, all for her. A personal butler, a Michelin-starred chef, and a dedicated concierge were at her beck and call. This was the true inner sanctum, a level of travel so exclusive that most of the airline's own employees didn't even know it existed. As Arya settled into a deep armchair with a glass of sparkling water, the frantic apologies finally subsided. The senior officials, having seen her comfortably installed, backed away, leaving her to the care of the suite's discreet staff. Left alone, the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a familiar, bone-deep weariness. This wasn't a victory she savored. It was an exhausting, depressingly familiar ritual. The initial slight, the escalation, the forced revelation of her status, the groveling apologies. She had played this scene in different forms her entire life. At a luxury car dealership, at a five-star restaurant, at a high-end boutique. Tonight was just the latest, most public performance. The only difference was the scale of the fallout. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from Sir David Harrison. Subject: unreserved apology and immediate action. "Dear Arya, I am still reeling from our phone call. I cannot adequately express how appalled and furious I am at the treatment you received from my staff. It is an inexcusable failure at every level and a deep personal and professional embarrassment. Be assured action has been taken. The lounge manager, Robert Miller, and the agent, Bethany Rose Clark, have been suspended indefinitely, pending termination. Their records will reflect the gravity of this incident, ensuring they will not be in a position to represent our brand, or likely any other in this industry, again. I have also ordered an immediate top-down review of all customer-facing sensitivity and bias training programs across our entire North American operation, to be overseen by my personal office. This cannot and will not happen again. Your partnership with Zenith Dynamics is of paramount importance to us, but this goes beyond business. It is a matter of basic human decency. Please let me know if there is anything, and I mean anything, we can do to make amends. Yours in deepest regret, Sir David Harrison Area read the email twice. Bethany Rose Clark. The name gave a face to the young woman whose life had been irrevocably altered in the span of 15 minutes. There was a part of Aria that felt a pang of something, not pity exactly, but a sad recognition of the waste. A young woman, poisoned by a prejudice she had likely absorbed from the world around her, had thrown her career away for the cheap thrill of feeling superior to a black woman. And Robert Miller. He was worse. He was a manager, a leader. He had the power to diffuse the situation, to choose fairness. Instead, he chose the path of least resistance, which was the path of bigotry. He had failed the most fundamental test of leadership. His fate was earned. But the email mentioned a third person only in passing, the man who had fanned the flames, Gregory Thompson. The airline had no authority over him. His karma, Aria mused, was yet to be delivered. That thought lingered in her mind, an unresolved equation. Her quiet reflection was interrupted when the suite's concierge approached her deferentially. Ms. Carrington, your flight is ready for boarding whenever you are. We can escort you directly to the aircraft door from here. Thank you, Charles. I'll be ready in 10 minutes, and she said. As she gathered her things, she made a decision. This incident couldn't just be about punishment. Sir David's email about new training was a start, but corporate initiatives were often just lip service, a PR maneuver. If this moment was to have any real meaning, it needed to be leveraged for genuine, systemic change. She wouldn't just be a victim of their failure. She would become the architect of their improvement. She typed a quick reply to Sir David. David, thank you for your prompt and decisive action. I appreciate it. On the matter of the training review, my company, Zenith Dynamics, has one of the leading diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI consultancy divisions in the world. We advise Fortune 50 companies on creating truly equitable corporate cultures. Perhaps we can turn this unfortunate incident into a productive collaboration. Have your team connect with my Chief People Officer, Dr. Elena Vance, to discuss how we might be able to help you build something genuinely effective. Best area, she hit send. It was a master stroke. It was benevolent, yet it was also a power play. She was now a client, a partner, and a potential vendor who would be paid handsomely to fix the very problem she had exposed. She was turning their liability into her leverage. This was how she had built her empire, not with anger, but with strategy. As she was escorted through a private jet bridge to the waiting 747, the flight attendants greeted her with hushed, reverent apologies. The news had clearly spread like wildfire through the crew. As she settled into her seat, 1A, the captain himself came out of the cockpit to personally apologize. The entire system was now contorting itself in deference to her. But as the plane door closed and the aircraft began its slow taxi to the runway, her mind was still on that one loose thread, Gregory Thompson. His smirking, entitled face was burned into her memory. The universe, Aria believed, had a way of balancing its books. His invoice was still outstanding. The wheels of corporate karma grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. For Robert Miller and Bethany Rose Clark, the consequences were swift and brutal. As Sir David's email promised, they were terminated. But it didn't end there. The incident, though not public, became an internal legend, a whispered case study in what not to do. Their names were unofficially blacklisted. Robert, once a respected manager on a six-figure salary, found himself unemployable in the aviation industry. A year later, he was working as an assistant manager at a budget rental car company in a desolate lot near Newark Airport, the ghost of his former authority mocking him with every minivan he inspected for scratches. Bethany Rose's fall was less precipitous, but just as complete. Her dreams of climbing the corporate ladder vanished. She ended up moving back to her parents' home in suburban New Jersey, working as a receptionist at a local dental office. The sterile smell of antiseptic, a constant reminder of how clinically her ambitions had been excised. But the story of Gregory Thompson required a more elegant, more devastating stroke of fate. 2 weeks after the incident at JFK, Aria was back in her corner office at the Zenith Dynamics headquarters in London. The view of the city was spectacular, but she was focused on the files displayed on her oversized monitor. She was reviewing the final candidates for the Zenith Catalyst program, a multi-million-dollar initiative to invest in and acquire promising mid-sized tech companies. Her chief strategy officer, a sharp man named Julian Croft, was walking her through the top 3 contenders. And the last one, Thompson Innovations, is a strong contender from a product standpoint, Julian said, pointing to the screen. Their logistics optimization software is brilliant. It could revolutionize our supply chain vertical. The founder, Gregory Thompson, is a bit of a classic salesman, old school, but he built the company from the ground up. The name struck Aria like a bolt of lightning. Gregory Thompson. It couldn't be. Pull up a picture of him, Aria said, her voice dangerously neutral. Julian tapped a few keys. A corporate headshot filled the screen. It was him. The same bloated face, the same smug eyes, the same man who had stood behind her in line, dripping with condescension and proclaiming that she didn't belong. Aria stared at the picture, a slow, cold wave of realization washing over her. The universe wasn't just balancing its books, it was delivering the ledger directly to her desk. Thompson Innovations was, according to the file, desperate for this acquisition. They had over-leveraged on a recent expansion and were burning through cash. The Zenith deal wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. Without it, they would likely face bankruptcy within 6 months. Tell me more about him, Julian, Aria said, her eyes still fixed on the screen. The man, not the company. Well, Julian said, slightly confused by her focus, he's known to be a bit abrasive. A few whispers about a difficult workplace culture, high turnover. He's a member of a few old-fashioned country clubs, sits on the board of his alma mater. Pretty standard for that generation of CEO. Why the interest? Aria leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Because culture is everything. A brilliant product built on a toxic foundation is a house of cards. We aren't just acquiring software, Julian. We're acquiring people. We're acquiring leadership. We're acquiring a reputation. She remembered his words at the airport with crystalline clarity. Stop holding up the line for those of us who actually belong here. A man who thought that way about a stranger in an airport undoubtedly fostered a culture of exclusion and bias within his own company. His difficult workplace culture wasn't a quirk. It was a feature. Her decision was instantaneous. Kill the deal, she said. Julian was stunned. Aria, what? Their tech is leagues ahead of the competition. This could set us back a year. I don't care, she said, her voice final. I will not have the Zenith Dynamics name associated with that man or the culture he represents. I want you to personally call him and inform him that we are rescinding our offer, and I want you to be specific about the reason. What reason do I give? Julian asked, bewildered. Tell him, Aria said, standing up and walking to her window, looking out over the sprawling city, that after a final review we found a fundamental and irreconcilable misalignment of corporate values. 3 days later, Julian reported back. The call had been made. Gregory Thompson had apparently gone ballistic, screaming and threatening lawsuits before finally breaking down and pleading. Julian had held firm, repeating the phrase misalignment of corporate values like a mantra. The fallout was catastrophic for Thompson Innovations. News that Zenith had pulled out at the 11th hour spooked their creditors. The loans were called in. Within 2 months, the company was forced into insolvency. The brilliant software was sold for pennies on the dollar to a competitor in a bankruptcy auction. Gregory Thompson lost everything. His company, his fortune, his country club memberships. He was ruined, a victim not of a bad business decision, but of a 5-minute lapse in character. a moment where he chose bigotry over basic decency. He had tried to gatekeep a VIP lounge and in doing so, had torched his entire life's work. His karma had arrived, and it was a bill he could never hope to pay. Arya took no joy in his downfall, but she felt a profound sense of rightness. The ledger was now balanced. The ecosystem had been cleansed. Her work was not just about building a company, it was about curating a world she wanted to live in, a world where the Gregory Thompsons of the world did not hold power. And in that quiet, decisive moment in her office, she had done just that. The months that followed the JFK incident became a testament to Arya Carrington's true definition of power. It was not a weapon to be wielded for revenge, but a tool to be used for reconstruction. Her offer to Sir David Harrison to help overhaul his company's culture was accepted with the speed and desperation of a drowning man grabbing a life raft. But for the executives at the airline, the reality of what that meant was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial video conference between Zenith's DEI division and the airline's senior management was a study in veiled hostility. The screen was filled with the faces of men and women in expensive suits, their expressions a mixture of resentment and forced politeness. They saw this as a penance, a PR crisis to be managed. They were prepared for a slap on the wrist, a new series of bland, legally approved training videos, and a hefty invoice. They were not prepared for Dr. Elena Vance. Arya's chief people officer was a formidable woman in her own right. With a PhD in organizational psychology and a reputation for dismantling toxic corporate structures with the precision of a surgeon, she radiated an unshakable, empathetic authority. She listened patiently for 20 minutes as the airline's VPs explained away the incident as an isolated case involving two rogue employees. They used phrases like unfortunate lapse and not representative of our core values. When they finished, Elena didn't argue. She simply asked a question. Can you please tell me, in your own words, what your core values are when it comes to customer dignity? The silence was deafening. They stumbled over one another, reciting generic mission statement platitudes about excellence and service that sounded hollow even to their own ears. Dr. Vance let the uncomfortable silence hang, allowing them to feel the vacuousness of their own corporate speak. That's our starting point, she said, her voice calm but firm. We're not here to install a patch. We are here to help you excavate, understand, and rebuild your foundation. The excavation was brutal. Dr. Vance's team conducted hundreds of confidential interviews, creating a safe space for employees to speak honestly. They unearthed a deep well of unconscious bias, a pervasive us versus them mentality, and a culture where mid-level managers like Robert Miller were incentivized to eliminate friction rather than uphold principles. The problem wasn't two rogue employees, it was 1,000 tiny cuts of bias inflicted daily, a systemic illness that Arya's incident had merely exposed as a festering wound. From this raw, honest data, the Sterling Standard was born. It was unlike any corporate training program the airline had ever seen. The Zenith team designed immersive virtual reality modules where a check-in agent could experience, through a virtual headset, being a passenger who was being ignored, condescended to, or racially profiled. They felt the rising anxiety, the sting of humiliation. They saw the smirks and dismissive gestures from their own virtual perspective. One veteran flight attendant, a man named Gary who had been with the airline for 30 years, emerged from the VR simulation, pale and shaken. "My God," he whispered to Dr. Vance. I've done that. The little sigh, the glance at the clock. I never thought that's what it felt like on the other side. It was a breakthrough moment, repeated hundreds of times over, as the abstract concept of bias became a visceral, emotional reality. For Arya, this project was a strategic masterpiece. It transformed a personal insult into a landmark, multi-million-dollar contract that cemented Zenith Dynamics as a global leader in ethical corporate transformation. Their stock price saw a bump as news of the innovative partnership was lauded in business journals. But behind the boardroom victories, the incident had left a personal mark. It had scraped away a layer of her hard-won composure, reminding her that for all her success, her blackness would, in some eyes, always enter the room before her title did. She channeled that weary anger not into bitterness, but into the meticulous design of the Sterling Standard, pouring her own experiences and insights into its foundation. Almost a year to the day after the incident, Aria found herself at JFK once more, waiting for the same flight to London. She entered the Sterling Club, not with trepidation, but with the keen eye of an architect inspecting her creation. The space had been physically renovated. The lighting was warmer, the layout more open, but the real change was in the atmosphere. It was alive with a quiet, respectful energy. The staff, now noticeably more diverse, moved with a confident sense of purpose. The new lounge manager, a sharp, poised young black woman named Sarah, greeted her by name. "Ms. Carrington, it's a pleasure to welcome you back. Your favorite corner table is waiting. May I bring you a glass of the cloudy apple juice you prefer?" Aria was momentarily taken aback. The detail was minute, pulled from her travel profile, but it was the kind of detail that was only noticed by a team that was actively, intentionally paying attention. "Thank you, Sarah. That would be wonderful." As she sat, she watched Sarah handle a minor crisis. An elderly couple had missed their connection and were distraught. There was no condescension in Sarah's approach, no hint of a manager looking to solve a problem. Instead, she knelt to be at eye level with the woman in the wheelchair, speaking with genuine compassion. She listened. She reassured. She made them feel seen and cared for, personally escorting them to a quiet area and handling their rebooking herself. Aria saw in Sarah's actions the living embodiment of the program she had helped build. This was the antithesis of Bethany Rose's dismissive sneer. This was dignity in action. Later, Sarah stopped by her table. "I hope you don't mind me saying, Ms. Carrington," she began, her voice soft, "but many of us here know the story of what happened last year. When the Sterling Standard program was rolled out, it changed everything. For the first time, we had a language to talk about these things. It empowered us. Because of the work you initiated, people like me were finally seen as leadership material." Aria felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the luxurious surroundings. This was the true return on her investment. It wasn't the consulting fees or the positive press. It was this. It was Sarah. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the moment. It was a picture message from the director of her philanthropic foundation. It showed a dozen smiling, brilliant teenage girls of color, all from underserved communities, standing in a Zenith Dynamics lab. They were holding up circuit boards from a robotics project, part of a coding camp Aria personally funded. The text below the image read, "The next generation of architects. They said to thank you for building a house where they know they belong." Aria looked from the image on her phone to the bustling, harmonious lounge around her, and then out the vast window at the powerful jets waiting to conquer the sky. She hadn't just put a few bigots in their place. She had used the moment to reinforce the foundations of her own empire, to repair the flaws in another, and to lay the groundwork for a future where the next generation of powerful women would never have their belonging questioned. Their credentials would not be on a platinum card, but in the brilliant work of their hands and the unshakable confidence in their hearts. The fight was far from over, but tonight, in this small, transformed corner of the world, she allowed herself to feel a profound and satisfying peace. She had won. Aria Carrington's story is a powerful reminder that the worst moments of prejudice can often become the catalysts for the most profound change. It wasn't just about the satisfying moment of revealing the Platinum Pass. It was about what she did with that power afterwards. She didn't just demand justice for herself. She rebuilt the entire system to ensure it wouldn't happen to others. This story shows that true power isn't about shutting doors on people, but about having the strength and wisdom to build new, better ones that are open to everyone. It's a testament to the idea that karma isn't just about punishment. It's about balance, accountability, and the eventual, unshakable triumph of integrity. If this story of resilience and righteous justice resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell for more true life stories of empowerment and karma. We'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments below.